Thank you so much, Kate. That was wonderful, and Kate's remarks will be available on mas.org. I'd like now to introduce Dr. Judith Rodin, President of the Rockefeller Foundation, who will be speaking today on the new innovations and financing models that can help build resilient, livable cities and new low-carbon economies that are both sustainable and prosperous. Judith is the 12th president of the Rockefeller Foundation. She brings leadership in the field of urban innovation going back to her time at the University of Pennsylvania, where she was the first woman to lead an Ivy League institution and where her vision and initiative led the revitalization of West Philadelphia. Today, this stands as a model for urbanization that is being leveraged in other cities around the country. Since joining the foundation in 2005, Judith has brought dynamism and leadership to a broad series of complex issues. The Rockefeller Foundation affirms its pioneering philanthropic mission by supporting and shaping innovations to ensure that more people can access and benefit from globalization while strengthening resilience to its risks. In a U.S. News article published on this exact date last year, Judith is quoted as saying of her work with the foundation, "My style is to think of how we work as much as what we work on." It's this remarkable approach of increasing efficiency in order to meet challenges in a rapidly developing world which brings her such success. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Judith Rodin to the stage. Judy.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much, Vin. Let me begin with that and thanking the Municipal Arts Society for the invitation and also for your inspiration. The theme of this gathering is the role of public-private investment and partnership in building livable cities. And the MAS has been New York City's champion of this very powerful idea for a century and more. MAS helped design our subway system 100 years ago. It helped save numerous landmarks from Radio City Music Hall to Grand Central Station to Times Square. With the Society's guidance, the twin beams of the 9/11 Memorial remind us each September of the city's resilience. In fact, when you scan our skyline, it is really easy to see why public-private partnerships are so crucial to livable cities. They're the fabric and foundation of New York City, and indeed of any city. This very space, the historic Hotel Pennsylvania in the heart of Penn Station Commercial District, is a reminder of that. When the original Penn Station was demolished in 1964, the sense of loss and anger among New Yorkers triggered a new commitment to preservation and to smarter urban planning. The city enacted the first statutes to protect historic architecture, and private organizations like the MAS advocated and agitated for sustainable planning and design. Now, 100 years after Penn Station was first built, ground was ceremonially broken this week on Moynihan Station at the historic Farley Post Office. As for this historic 91-year-old hotel, the future is less certain, with the regulatory process nearly cleared for its demolition and the subsequent construction of a soaring new office tower that will rival the nearby Empire State Building. There are probably as many opinions on that plan as there are New Yorkers, but the space we're in today is a timely reminder of the importance of partnerships, of dialogue, and of public-private innovation as we strive for livability in New York City and elsewhere. To that end, what Vin asked me to focus on today is not why these elements are so critical, but specifically how they can inform the creation of livable 21st century cities in a time of greater environmental uncertainty and in a time perhaps of greater economic uncertainty. Let's start with that word, though, livability. We know that what makes a city livable is somewhat subjective, depending on who you are and what you do and where you call home. That was certainly clear in the data released yesterday on the Livability Survey. But from our perspective, from the work of the Rockefeller Foundation, which has worked to help shape and help define the space of urban theory and planning for more than a half a century, We think there's also an objective, global, 21st century definition of livability. From our vantage point, a critical element of what makes a city livable is the degree to which it is resilient. Our urban investments, therefore, are focused on building resilience through innovative partnerships that create and strengthen the infrastructures that help communities bounce back from the many shocks and leverage at the same time the many opportunities of globalization. Shocks such as extreme weather brought on by climate change, extreme economic crises brought on by the really extraordinary interconnectedness of our societies and our markets, and opportunities such as the chance to create tens of millions of green jobs, build affordable, climate-friendly public transportation and housing, and strengthen social capital and inclusion in all of our communities. In cities, we have demonstrated that 3 such infrastructures can help achieve the twin goals of building resilience and leveraging more equitable opportunity. Let me describe these infrastructures and just give a few examples from our work. First, livable cities must have the physical infrastructure required to withstand and deflect disruptive shocks related to global warming, certainly the foremost physical manifestation of globalization. Consider just a few of our current initiatives. We're working with mayors and county executives in several mega regions, including New York City and overseas, to assess and address the impacts of climate change, helping these leaders guide city, state, and interagency planning processes over the coming years. For example, in the US, we're assisting the Center for Clean Air Policy's Urban Leaders Program to help connect local policy makers from around the country and help them collaborate by trading ideas and best practices. We are also building a network for urban resilience in Asian cities as well, many of them incredibly vulnerable to climate change and demographic onslaughts. Each of these efforts is a targeted attempt to build a body of knowledge and experience around the planning necessary to create a resilient physical infrastructure where it does not exist, or where it does exist, to identify the points at which it might buckle under the pressures of global warming and severe weather. For instance, cities must have provisions for temporary shelter in the wake of a climate change-induced natural disaster. To that end, in New York City, we sponsored a few years ago a What If NYC, a design competition for post-disaster provisional housing, leading to a fabulous modular design solution to house New York's population literally above the floods after an environmental catastrophe. We've helped support Plan YC, the comprehensive sustainability master plan that focuses on all of New York's physical infrastructure. I'll note one other thought-provoking initiative we've spearheaded to promote new innovations in resilient physical infrastructure. Recently, we helped to fund the Rising Currents exhibit at MoMA, and I hope many of you saw it. It showed the work of interdisciplinary teams of engineers, architects, and urban planners proposing the redesign of New York City's shoreline to withstand impending sea level rise, which is quite likely to come for New York City. The designers developed creative innovations to deal with rising waters, a fingered shoreline that reduced wave velocity, the introduction of porous material into the streets of Lower Manhattan to absorb water very quickly and then release it back out very slowly, housing built to hang above the shoreline. This was actually more than a fascinating thought experiment. 40 years from now, 3/4 of the people on the planet will be packed into cities, as you heard from Vin. The majority of these cities will be coastal. Already, some 44% of the world's population live within 100 miles of seawater shoreline. It's not far-fetched to think that an artistic conception of sustainable urban planning that focused on water rise and flow today might just inform the real-world infrastructure of future cities in the coming decades. However futuristic or realistic, A resilient physical infrastructure will, we hope, insulate cities from the potentially devastating impacts of climate change. But livable cities must also have a strong, resilient economic infrastructure as well. Cities must have economies that are diverse enough to withstand financial shocks and innovative enough to seize the opportunities presented by challenges, particularly, but not solely, the challenge of climate change. In some ways, these goals are one and the same. At a time of high unemployment, slow-going economic recovery, and increased risk of climate catastrophe, a new growth model for cities based on a low-carbon economy would generate green jobs, diversify urban economies, and promote widespread prosperity and livability. Recent studies bear this out. The Economic Policy Institute and the Center for American Progress estimate that an annual investment of $150 billion in clean energy would create 1.7 million jobs, half of which would be accessible to Americans with a high school degree or less. In other words, green jobs are one area where it may be possible to promote economic resilience for the working poor and put the U.S. economy on a more resilient, more sustainable path to growth without the episodes of boom and bust that have characterized our recent business cycles in the United States. As an example of Rockefeller's recent work in this space, we funded a coalition of organizations to develop the policy design and implementation roadmap for Green Jobs, Green New York, which was passed into law last year with an allocation from Albany of $112 million in regional greenhouse gas emissions, RGGI, funding. Today, we continue to work with state government and municipal partners on implementation of the program, which aims to retrofit 1 million homes throughout New York. In the process, Green Jobs, Green New York will become the largest retrofit program to utilize an on-bill recovery financing mechanism whereby a portion of savings in home utility bills are reinvested for more retrofits and hiring more workers. A resilient and green economic infrastructure can ensure high-quality jobs for city dwellers, but there are two vital crossbeams that must support this infrastructure: sustainable housing and affordable transportation. In our view of the latter, transportation investment choices affect everything, from access to jobs and services, the cost of goods, and energy and infrastructure priorities. Each year, Americans lose 4.2 billion hours and $87 billion in productivity and wasted fuel stuck in traffic. In addition, the cost of transportation is now the second highest expenditure for American households, and for low-wage families, it is their highest expense, a staggering 30% of household income. This unfair burden denies millions the opportunity for social mobility, for wealth creation, for investment in the future, and for their quality of life. In other words, it impacts the economic resilience of urban residents and therefore the livability of any community. Reforming our transportation system, even in New York, is critical if the United States is to prosper and lead in the 21st century, and if all of our cities are to be resilient and livable. The administration in Washington recognizes this fact and recently announced it will ask Congress for a $50 billion package to improve our roads, our rails, and our ports. That would be a good start, but a $50 billion infrastructure investment pales in comparison to the $300 billion that China is investing in their rail system alone. That is why we at the Rockefeller Foundation are engaging a broader and more strategically diverse constituency that includes civic leaders, grassroots groups, and a core of insiders who embrace and will push for a new transportation paradigm that promotes low-carbon, transit-supportive policy and practice. And private sector resources must be mobilized in new public-private partnerships for the sustainable infrastructure and transportation needs of metropolitan megaregions in the United States. Therefore, we're currently working with mayors and county executives in several mega regions, including New York City, to help them frame smarter, more sustainable transportation policies and to elevate the stature of transportation and infrastructure challenges higher on the national agenda, and to help broker new financing models for effective, leveraged private investment. Like transportation, resiliency also demands that we build sustainable, affordable housing, the second crossbeam that supports any city's economic infrastructure. That is a key focus of the Rockefeller Foundation as well, particularly in New York. One of our many efforts to promote sustainable housing engaged the What We Works Collaborative at HUD, which brings together 4 of the top housing and urban policy research institutions, along with 6 other national funders and the top policy people at HUD. Together with these partners, we've helped to shape the Sustainable Communities Initiative to focus federal government resources on creating livable, sustainable communities. This has also informed HUD's rethinking of the low-income housing tax credit, financing for multifamily housing, and the beginnings of a much-needed and long-overdue national rental housing policy, with federal strategies for older industrial and weak market cities as well as growing cities, and new strategies for vouchers and rental assistance. This brings me to the third needed infrastructure for livable cities, and maybe arguably the most critical, a strong and resilient social infrastructure. A resilient physical infrastructure shelters our cities. A resilient economic infrastructure enriches our cities. But a resilient social infrastructure sustains our cities. It makes them truly livable and underpins many of the efforts and opportunities I've described. At Rockefeller, we believe in the data we saw yesterday support that livable, resilient cities need satisfied citizens. It needs strong social capital and community competence to promote civic health and wealth and vitality, which is why efforts to build and strengthen social infrastructure have become a priority for us. We recognize individuals whose work has enriched the community and civic infrastructure of New York City through our Jane Jacobs Awards, and we were thrilled to give them again earlier in the week. We have invested in the Cities of Service initiative here in New York and elsewhere. This started last fall when a group of forward-looking mayors, led by Mayor Bloomberg, wanted to dramatically increase and make more effective civic engagement in cities across the country. The organization was designed to coordinate city services and strategies and to engage volunteers, to engage the service world as partners with cities and focus volunteer efforts on city priorities and perhaps creating more meaningful outcomes. Running a race to the top-like competition, we received hundreds of applications from cities throughout the nation, each developing a comprehensive service plan to match volunteers and community partners to the areas of greatest need. And New York City and its chief service officer was the model that the others were aspiring to. Partnering with Bloomberg Philanthropies, we selected the 20 best and funded a new created role, a chief service officer in 20 other mayors' offices. Winning cities now have a point person, as we do in New York City, responsible with both the executive power and the full-time responsibility to foster volunteerism. Here in New York City, we've tried to take citizen engagement even further. We've supported 1 Minute for Your City, a project of the CEOs for Cities organization that's designed to solicit ideas from New York residents on how to improve the city. And it will be a great follow-up to the livability data and the livability index. 1 Minute for Your City is being planned and now is in the implementation phase in partnership with the mayor's office and Kate Levin's office. Through media outreach, city residents will be offered the chance to suggest ideas to improve New York. The ideas will then be transferred back to the city for aggregation, analysis, and implementation. It's a wonderful example of crowdsourcing that will mine all of our citizens for new innovations while cultivating a deeper sense of civic engagement among participants. Let me pause here for a moment. Having given you a brief overview of some of our work to build the physical and economic and civic infrastructure that supports a livable city, to extend the metaphor, I'd like to point out that there is one bridge that connects them all. That bridge is innovation. Innovation is something that we try to have inform everything we do at Rockefeller. Innovation in markets, in organizations, in products, in processes. We work to help others adapt and adopt innovative efforts to solve the pressing problems of globalization. I've described what I hope sound like a number of innovations that we believe will build more resilient, more livable, and more prosperous cities. But in a time of continued economic recovery, of uncertainty and scarcity, it is worth taking a moment to note that there are also innovative mechanisms through which we can fund these new approaches to livability and sustainability. Certainly, what we are seeing in our nation is little appetite for deficit spending that would enable the federal government to support innovation at the scale required to produce real change and real results. But that doesn't mean that we can't think big and act bold. Indeed, you may have seen the front page above the fold Times story last week that Google and a private investment firm are working with federal regulators to build a 350-mile wind energy corridor off the mid-Atlantic coast. This isn't just the future of clean energy generation. It represents the future of innovative investments that can benefit bottom lines and the public interest at the same time. The Rockefeller Foundation has been particularly involved and active in this burgeoning space called impact investing. Take our work in Pennsylvania, for instance. The state recently adopted a retrofit loan program called Keystone Help. To capitalize the program, the state partnered with a niche investment bank that is securing help loans and selling them to third-party investors. Rockefeller enabled this partnership by picking up the tab for the bank's services to the state. In doing so, we've helped to develop a secondary market for residential energy efficiency finance, one that we hope will prove both successful and scalable in other states, and one that we are now bringing to New York City. Many foundations, including Rockefeller, are using program-related investments, or PRIs, to provide capital to organizations at favorable terms in ways that are tailored to the growth needs of the recipient. In this way, PRIs are often the first tier of financing that can then help the organization obtain commercial credit down the road. One such PRI investment by a group of foundations which has been highly successful is the New York City Acquisition Loan Fund. This fund was set up several years ago to build up to 30,000 units of affordable housing in New York by lending to both for-profit and not-for-profit developers. Through this collaborative enterprise, the fund raised more than $32.6 million in foundation funding, which was the first tier of the riskiest capital, in order to leverage the second tier of capital, which was $190 million from banks like JP Morgan, HSBC, and other large lenders, which put their capital at lower risk and made it more, gave them the greater confidence and ability to make these investments. These are just a few examples of how organizations from philanthropies to private enterprise are stepping up as financial partners where governments are being forced to step back. And in doing so, these new models, these new forms of investment are increasing the resilience of our physical and economic and civic infrastructures that are critical to prosperity and livability in New York City and elsewhere, certainly in this century. I'll leave you with one thought. It is no surprise that cities like New York are today the locus of so much of this critical innovation. There's the old idiom that necessity is the mother of invention. Put differently, in the context of our discussion yesterday, it is clear that livability may be the mother of urban innovation. And nowhere is this more readily apparent than in New York City, not only with respect to the innovative partnerships and initiatives I've described, but simply in our everyday encounters throughout this 3-century-old metropolis. When you step into an elevator in a midtown skyscraper, the brake that holds your car in place was first demonstrated and deployed in New York to accommodate the vertical expansion necessitated by a rapidly growing population. When you leave this hotel and you turn the corner onto 7th Avenue, the right angles by which you navigate Manhattan were first plotted 199 years ago in 1811 by urban planners who hoped to curb the spread of disease through a street grid that in their day and age was thought to promote better air circulation and therefore better public health. So much of our current urban landscape is the product of innovations born of the need and desire over the centuries to build a more livable and more resilient New York. We are constantly and often unwittingly interacting with 19th and 20th century innovations that were purposefully designed to better our physical and economic and social infrastructures. Today, as we strive again for livability and for urban resilience in the 21st century, it is worth noting that while our modern day work will take on very different forms to address very different challenges, we are engaging in and continuing a long tradition that will, with our partnership and innovation, build an even stronger and more sustainable New York. Thank you.